Hello everyone, and welcome back to Steph Devs, the devlog where I am foolishly currently trying to make a game in just 2 months and release that on Steam. Now, it's been about 20 to 25 days since my last proper update video, so today let me tell you about the hell that is UI programming, aka where I've been for the past month. Just as a reminder, at the end of the last update, I talked about how the next thing to work on would be the looting and UI interface for managing your loot and inventory. Now, almost a month later, we do have a working user interface for the inventory, or the outfitting screen as I'm calling it. So first of all, I spent like the first 3 days wrestling with Unity's UI system to try to figure out a way to organize these things in a reasonable fashion that's not going to involve a ton of manual work. Now, obviously, making a list is pretty easy in Unity. You just use a vertical layout group. But the problem I was having was trying to embed multiple lists within lists. For example, here I have a weapon panel. This is listing all the stats and parts that make up a weapon. I've got 3 different parts, and each of those parts has some number of stats underneath it. So here I have a discharger, and it has different stats for damage, number of projectiles, accuracy, etc., etc. Now, what I wanted to make happen was to allow myself just to add and remove items as I please and have everything lay out automatically. You can see a problem occurring here. If I duplicate one of these items, it starts to overlap with the other part underneath it. So to fix that, I have to come in and manually set the size of the discharger part of this. I was trying to figure out some scheme to make this automatic, but that turned out to be really complicated within Unity's UI system. I did manage to get it to work with a component called content size fitter, I think, which automatically adjusts a parent's size to include all of its contents. Problem with using that was that it conflicted with the vertical layout group that I wanted to have above it. So while it kind of did work sometimes, it was really buggy and had a message there saying this is not supported. You shouldn't have this underneath a vertical layout group. So I settled for what I have here now, which is a pretty well set up thing. I don't have to worry about most of it, but I do need to adjust the size of things when I add or remove stats. Luckily, I'm not going to do that very often, so I'm pretty happy with this. As a side note, I also spent some time working on a script to do this for me automatically. It sounds like this should be a really simple task, but it's really not, and I think that's a big point against the UI system. At this point, I don't really love the UI system in Unity. I do appreciate that it's quite flexible and it's very polished and it works well, but fundamentally it has a few things going on inside that are just doesn't allow it to do what I need it to do. Now, with the UI layout settled, and don't get me wrong, this is going to improve. The art and the design of this UI this is first pass. But with the functionality of the layout figured out, the next step was to actually hook this up to my game code. And while Unity makes this pretty easy in their object-oriented, like in the Unity way of doing things, it's very easy. But for me, this became an issue. See, my code is not set up in an object-oriented way. It's not the way Unity, at least traditionally, has intended you to write code. I don't have code on mono behaviors. I don't use that stuff. I don't program in an object-oriented way. And this makes me a very happy person. However, while I'm very happy with the way that my game code is set up, it does tend to clash with Unity on certain occasions. And this is definitely one of those occasions. Now, honestly, at this point, I was deep in the trenches of the code and the details here. There's about a million different details that I could try to recall and talk about, and technical things, and why I decided to not do things the default way, why I decided to kind of replace a good chunk of the UI system, like the interaction part. But honestly, it's hard enough to remember all of the remember all the details of the decision making that went into this. There's just a lot of complexity here. On top of all that complexity of the interaction and the animation, UI, everything, there was also the big topic of the loot and how those things are defined and how they're stored in inventory and how I'm differentiating between one instance of an item and another, and how I'm planning to store that in the player file and how I'm loading that from like the editor. There's just a whole lot here that I dug through that is pretty difficult to think about clearly. There's a lot of stuff, and I just kind of pushed through it to try to get it done. Now, it would have been really useful to be documenting this process and bringing you through all these issues that I was running into and why I'm doing this or that. It would make it a lot easier to communicate the past 20 days to you, but with me being blindsided by the sheer magnitude of this problem, I just didn't have time to document, I felt. Now, I think this is a good learning experience, at least one more chunk. Like, I know it's difficult not to overscope, but this is one of those cases where you find out how another way that overscoping can happen. And it's always just the details that you're not thinking about. Now, it makes sense that this would be a complicated system, and it's not something that I've built before. Like, I haven't really built a UI system more complex than a heads-up display and a main menu, and I've never done inventory stuff with a loot table or anything like that. So thinking back, yeah, I could expect this to be a major challenge. I just wasn't ready for it. I had what seemed like a pretty solid idea of how this was gonna work. Like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna store items as this, and then I can populate the inventory. Like, it didn't seem like a big issue. But alas, the devil is in the details. So I'm slowly learning an intuition over time for when I do understand a solution and when I don't, because you can never really know until you actually go in and program it. But with all that said, we do have a working UI for now. It's not quite finished, but it's working. So just to show you what's going on, at least, here I've got 2 weapon slots, because you can equip up to 2 weapons in the game. So I can swap this by clicking it and grabbing free weapon 3, or I can take free weapon 1 here and pick one of these 2 slots to put it in. And the same goes for weapon parts. So I have a bunch of different receivers, as they're called, and I can place this in that guy, and I can place this over here and swap these parts around however I would like. Then of course we have our start button to start up the raid, and we're in the game with the weapons that we've chosen. So that inventory or that loadout that you choose in the menu translates to what you load into the game with, and that goes for the enemies as well. So they have their own loadout that's defined in the editor. So yeah, that's where I've been for the past basically month, and you might be thinking, wow, a whole month on the UI in a 2-month project doesn't look like this is going too well. So in the next video, we're going to talk about what this means for the project and where the project is going from here, because obviously it doesn't seem too realistic to launch a game in how much time do we have? Just under 3 weeks to push this game out and publish it on Steam. I don't think that's really reasonable. We'll talk about it in the next video. So if you're watching, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.